Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for the first installment of the Nation Roulette series of 2021. Now I haven't done one of these in about a month because I kind of got sidetracked with all the other projects and videos that I've been doing. Of course, you can go and check them out on my channel if you haven't done so already, but this is the first one of the new year and it concerns the Latin American nation of Honduras. I have actually done a video dedicated to the main footballing event concerning Honduras, that being the so-called football war between themselves and their neighbours El Salvador, which will be left in the description for you to check out yourselves, so I won't go too in depth into it here, although it will be brought up as a passing mention when the time comes to do so. As you can deduce from what people have dubbed this conflict, football is a very big deal in Honduras, as it manages to hold off competition from the likes of baseball and scuba diving to take top spots in terms of the most popular sports in the country. That being said, baseball did actually overhaul football for a brief period of time during the 1980s as the country's most popular sport, as it did in many other countries across the North American region, which has led to CONCACAF being the second weakest continental confederation ahead of Oceania in terms of its footballing ability. Nowadays, football is firmly established at the head of the pack for the Honduran public, with journalist Edibaldo Lainez quoted as saying that, quote, "Honduras is a nation of two passions, politics and football," close quote. As is to be expected, they have often come together, most notoriously of all in their aforementioned conflict with El Salvador, which commenced merely weeks after the two met in a playoff match to determine who would progress to the final round of CONCACAF World Cup qualifying for the 1970 World Cup. However, football plays such a huge part in the country's day-to-day operations that the nightly curfew imposed on the Honduran citizens up until the start of the 2010s would be lifted whenever the national team was in action. And in 2013, when they qualified for their second successive World Cup finals, the president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, declared a national holiday, something which Panama would replicate upon their own qualification success 4 years later. Now we move away from the current state of affairs of Honduran football and dwell a bit upon its history, which is actually quite plentiful upon further research. Although a game called Poc Tapoc was played by the Mayans in the region which would later become Honduras in the 1000s, which is seen by some to be the precursor of both football and basketball, the game of football itself was allegedly brought over for the first time in 1862, with British sailors believed to have been the ones to bring it over. It was formally established as a viable sport in the country in 1896, after a French ship brought over a multitude of footballs with it, and after seeing the countries around them create national football associations and national teams, the Honduran government started to introduce football lessons to the general public in the mid to late 1900s in an attempt to raise the sport's profile. It succeeded, and by 1917 it formally overtaken baseball as the most popular sport in the country, 5 years after its first football club, Club Deportivo Olimpia, had been founded. The national team made its bow in 1921 against Guatemala at the Independence Centenary Games, but they haven't had a worse game in their history since, as they suffered their record defeat in that game by losing 9-0, although their record win does outweigh their record defeat by 1 goal, as in 1946 they beat Nicaragua 10-0. 14 years after their debut, by which point they had finished third in the Central American and Caribbean Games in 1930, they finally got around to creating a football association, which would become affiliated with FIFA in 1945 and with CONCACAF in 1961 as one of its founding members. The vast majority of their major honours have come in the Copa Centroamericano, which they have won 4 times to date, including its last edition in 2017. But their greatest triumph on the international stage came in 1981 when, on home soil, they lifted their only Gold Cup title to date after winning the final group, which also earned them qualification to their first ever World Cup in 1982. Unfortunately for them, once at the World Cup finals, their fortunes have been pretty bleak, as in 1982, pitted against Spain, Yugoslavia and Northern Ireland, they would draw twice and lose once, with that defeat coming in their final group game against Yugoslavia to put them last in the group. Things wouldn't improve in their other 2 tournament appearances either, those coming in 2010 and 2014, as across those 2 tournaments they only managed to accrue 1 group stage point, with it coming in South Africa after a 0-0 draw with Switzerland, who would then go on to beat them 3-0 at the 2014 World Cup, and in qualification for the 2018 World Cup they lost to Australia in the Intercontinental Confederation playoff. One of the greatest moments in the country's footballing history would come in 2001, when they would appear in the Copa America, which would be hosted by Colombia that year, for the first and today only time in their history, being called in to replace Argentina, who were pulled out of the tournament owing to the death threats that their squad had received by Colombian rebels the day before the tournament was due to begin. They arrived merely hours before their first match was due to kick off, with not even a full squad at their disposal, yet despite this, they overcame a loss in that game against Costa Rica to not only qualify for the quarterfinals, but then go on to cause an absolutely seismic shock when they beat the reigning champions Brazil 2-0 in the quarterfinals, and they ended up finishing in 3rd place after beating Uruguay in the 3rd place playoff. Unsurprisingly, in the aftermath of this tournament, they would reach their highest ever place in the FIFA World Rankings of 20th, although they would sink to 101st by September 2015, which is thus far their lowest ever spot, and they currently find themselves in 64th. The highest goal scorer is Carlos Pavon with 57, although their most capped player might actually be familiar to a fair few of you, as it is their current captain and former Wigan, Athletic and Hull City left back, Maynor Figueroa, who scored the goal of the season in 2009-10 with a free kick inside his own half against Stoke, and has made 163 appearances for his national team so far in his career. Moving towards the league now, the Honduran Amateur League was established in 1947, but 14 years later, a professional league was mooted as a possibility, and after taking inspiration from the Mexican league structure, the Liga Nacional de Fútbol Profesional de Honduras was created in 1964. The oldest club in Honduras, Olimpia, also lead the way in terms of titles won, as they have won the league in any of its forms 31 times since 1964, including its most recent tournament in the form of the 2019-20 Apertura, as well as finishing as runners-up a further 19 times, with Motagua on 17 titles and Real España on 12 following in second and third. Up until 1997, the league was split in half, with the top 5 teams across those two groups playing each other in a second round group, wherein the top 2 teams would compete again in the final. In 1999 though, it was permanently changed to an apertura and a clausura, meaning opening and closing respectively in English, much like many other Latin American nations, which sees 2 separate round robins in which each of the 10 teams play each other twice, before a knockout round with the top 4 teams ensues. The league has taken place every year since 1964 pretty much unhindered, apart from in 1972 when it was cancelled owing to economic problems within the country, and last season's clausura owing to a pretty obvious reason, or so I hope. Football is often seen as a way for the populace to escape the harsh realities of their country, either by playing it or watching it, but unfortunately, much like the country's political landscape, it is oftentimes shaped by both corruption and violence. Alfredo Howard, who would become president of CONCACAF between 2011 and 2012 and vice president of FIFA in 2015, and Rafael Callejas, who was the president of the country between 1990 and 1994 but would acquire the Honduran Football Federation in his retirement, were both banned by the FIFA Ethics Committee from all footballing activities permanently in 2016, after it emerged that they were both involved in multiple corruption and racketeering cases. Chairmen of clubs including Motagua and Atletico Choloma have been arrested and sentenced to jail time after allegations of fraud came their way. Sula FC and Marathon have seen their owners indicted after pumping drug money into their respective clubs, and Juticalpa's owner, Ramon Salmi, had to step down from his role when he was found possessing military-grade weapons. This didn't paint a good image for Honduran football, and neither did allegations that emerged in 2013, but matches involving the national team have been interfered with by the organisation Football for You, who allegedly gave certain countries games particular officials in order to satisfy their wagers on the Asian betting market. Not great when you've just qualified for a World Cup, is it? Regrettably, much like across Central America, violence at football matches is not uncommon, and 23 fatalities have been recorded at Honduran football matches between 2000 and 2016, with the captain of the national team, Arnold Peralta, being gunned down whilst on holiday in the country in 2015. The entire league was actually temporarily suspended in 2017 after Marathon fans invaded the pitch following a disputed penalty in a game against Real España, as tear gas was needed to bring them apart, but it still didn't bring an end to the seemingly endemic violence in the country. Just 2 years later, 3 more fans would be killed in the build-up to the derby between Olimpia and Motagua, with stones being chucked at the Motagua bus, leading to 3 players suffering injuries. Let's hope that, in the years to come, the violence at football matches ceases to exist, as while some may see it as more than this, it is, at the end of the day, just a game and nothing more. That just about concludes today's video on football in Honduras. I really do hope that you found it either interesting or enjoyable, or preferably both. But if you did find it interesting or enjoyable, hit that like button of course, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.